I always love St. Luke's Gospel. You've heard me talk about this before, but the reason why I love it is because Luke is writing, I know Luke accounts for, by the way, 25% of the New Testament. He writes the Gospel of Luke, but then the second book is the Acts of the Apostles. But in his writing, every time he gives a parable, it is for men, he gives also one for women. So you've heard the lost sheep, the lost coin. And every time there's a one that is, it's so beautiful to see him always include women in every time he writes. Now, bear in mind, this is the gospel time, right? This is, which would have not have been, women would not have held a high profile position, but he gave them high profile constantly in teaching to them, in preaching to them, and indeed working alongside them. So here's today's gospel as an example. He says, the 12 were with him, and accompanying him were many women disciples. Well, of course, people say, well, of course there were women disciples. There was men disciples, women disciples, but that's a shock to many that we talk to today. There's Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Susanna, and many more who provided for them out of their resources. The reality is that women are more than 50% of our church. More than 50%. In fact, in America, the staffing at churches is 85% women. 85% women in the staffing of our churches. Indeed, on this trip, we have 4 church ladies, right? Our first good church. But hey, this is it. We're surrounded by women who do great work for our church. I think that's why I loved what Pope Francis did in bringing women to the fore in the church and constantly charging his bishops and cardinals to allow the women to assume levels of leadership. Under Pope Francis, he was the first time a woman took head of a dicastery, one of the departments, and she's officially the head of one of those departments. First time it was a non-cardinal, first time it was a woman. Here's the reality for us, is that the women have suffered much at the hands of our church. And and not because of intent, I don't think necessarily, but when we say that there are certain things they can't do, then by default there are certain struggles with that. Women have often been the backbone of one generation to the next. That's certainly true in our country back in Ireland here, but also true in the US. Many of our volunteers, most of our volunteers, are women at church. So why is that so important? It's important to understand because it's together that we do church. Men and women together. But there is a special place for women in our lives. I know that my mother was the one who played an incredibly important part in the family household of raising us in the faith. It wasn't that my father didn't. He did. He was there. He was a faithful man. But she was the one who took it upon herself to teach us the tenets of the faith. There are many women in our life that help us along the way. I know I rely on many women, not just the 4 that are with me in the church today here, but many more who help at the church back home and at Holy Spirit the same. We work alongside each other's co-workers in the Vineyard. Who in your life as a woman has been your support? Maybe it has been your mother. Maybe it is your spouse who's with you right now. Maybe it is a friend who's played a mother-like role in your life. Let us today remember the women in our lives. The women who have helped us form us and help us to be who we are. I know there are many women I think of in my life. I suspect for you there are too. Let's hold them in prayer today, and let's hold with those the women of this very place here, who have run this place for over 100 years. They have prayed, these women worked and prayed together, the Benedictine nuns in a monastery, praying for the church and the world. We need those prayers. We need the women in our lives. We need each other. So today, let's hold them in our hearts and pray for them at this table and offer up praise and worship for them, first and foremost, and then prayers for them, if they're still alive, that they continue to be women of faith who guide us in the way of Christ.